Hello, hello. A bit confused with the time over here, because that Discord really wanted it to do like an hour earlier. So sorry about that. Gonna get started in just a couple of minutes. I know we're earlier than usual as well, so it's all confusing right now. Oh, why is the background black again? What? I don't get how this works. Oh, there we go. Let me try something else here. Okay. Let's try this. There we go. Why is it so difficult? Hello, Anton. Hello, Snowbat. Hello, Alexander. Randoom, Chris, Pretty. Love to see you all here. Oh, glad that we got the backgrounds working. Got everyone's work on there now. That's awesome. Okay, glad that's sorted out. Yeah, how are we all doing? We all doing good? All had a productive week so far? My week has been pretty good. I'm kind of shifting a bunch of stuff around at the moment. We're gonna switch to the camera just here a bit, but I've been switching around like a bunch of stuff, trying to basically clear up my schedule a little bit because it was getting a bit chaotic. But yeah, we should be good now. Put on some chill vibes as well. Yeah. What has been happening in the background? I'm doing like a bunch of stuff for the team challenges, of course. Saturday was jam-packed with meetings. So on Saturday we went through like all the individual teams, their work, and we basically had like an hour slot with all the teams where we like talked through like their current blockouts, how things are looking, how the team is doing, kind of checking that out as well. We unfortunately had one team drop out as well, so there's 14 teams left. So let me actually give you like an overview, right, of what people have been making. I think that could be cool. Because people were sharing their blockouts in their Discord as well. Let's give that a quick look. Oh, actually. No, we can do it here. So yeah, we got Team 7 doing this cool little cave system. A lot of people opted for caves. I think that's just normal, right? Because you only have 5 weeks to do what you want to do. So like caves are like a really natural way of just like condensing what you want to do. We've got this nice piece here. I think there's going to be like some robotics and stuff here. There's going to be a robot here with like a crash spaceship in the back, which is looking pretty interesting. On Team 6 with a bunch of vines. Sort of like getting some early Indiana Jones vibes here. Team 1, Stylized team this time around. Doing, I think this is going to be underwater. Underwater, like sunken treasure kind of stuff, which is cool. Team 2, also Stylized team. It'd be nice. I think, yeah, I like the way that like the background is going. With just like the light coming from the back. It's gonna be cool. Another Stylized team here. Probably one of my favorites so far. I really like just like the colors already, even though it's like really early on. I just like the fundamentals of the scene are like really well done already. We got Team 9. Yeah, this is gonna be a cool one for scope. 1410. This was I was gonna say, I love how they're thinking about the light in that one. Yeah, that's this one, right? There's a little bit of delay here. I like it. Like very, very directed already, right? With like the mushrooms coming in too. It's gonna be cool. This one is also really cool. Unfortunately, this was a team that had to drop out. So probably one of my favorites from the lineup, but unfortunately they will not be continuing. Which it's not a new case, right? I think what is interesting with these team challenges is that a lot of people have been working in their isolated pods for such a long time, and they're just doing their personal work, that at this point when they're doing the team challenges, they get confronted with like a team dynamic for the first time, and it can be really intense and a lot to figure out. And like there's people across the entire skill spectrum basically, right? And I'm specifically talking about the skill spectrum when it comes to the communication skills, right? Some people have just an innate nature where they're like really good with communicating. Other people may not be as good, right? And they have to take a lot of lessons. But as long as we learn from it, that's all that counts. This team is probably crazy. Like when I saw that boat come in, I was like, oh my god, are they serious? But hey, that's all about the fun, right? Like the fun of challenging yourself and the team. It's gonna be interesting to see this one coming along. That one also has a lot of potential, but understandable, it happens. Yeah, for sure. Like, and I mean, this is not the first time. It's the first time that we had like this big of a challenge. But it's also not the first time that people had to drop out for whatever reason, right? Sometimes also we had teams kind of just like fall apart because life just got in the way. So there's so many reasons why that stuff can happen. Hey, Detai on Twitch. Lovely to see you here. Welcome. And then Martin is here. Hi. It's been a while. How are you doing? Got Team 4 over here. We're currently just going through like all the team challenges, which is like a challenge that we host, and we basically put teams together from like all the people that apply, and then just basically just give them an Unreal scene and let them like make stuff. I mean, we organize a bunch of stuff in the background as well. It's not like we just let them do their thing. Yeah. Team 11. I think this was one of the teams that I was involved in. So they're going to be making an attic that is filled with just like stuff that like an explorer found along the way, which is pretty cool. Sort of like very Uncharted kind of vibes, right, from this one. So it's going to be interesting. Then we got a couple of gates. Oh my god, there's so many teams. It's unbelievable. It's crazy the amount of teams that we have this time around, which is just like really inspiring. But yeah, it's just never would have thought that it would grow this big, you know? And then we got Team 12. They're kind of doing like another cave situation. I'm curious if Team 14 is kind of doing this as like an open environment or like a cave. But Team 12 is definitely doing a cave situation. They have some cool inspirations with what they call techno magic. So I'm really curious how that is gonna be coming together as well. Getting some real Atlantis vibes from which one team is this? Team 15. It's gonna look cool. And then finally we have Team 5. Very unique concept, a unique take on the subject, which is always pretty cool, right? Like seeing like the spectrum of how people like interpreted like the theme Hidden Splendor, right? We kind of do that on purpose. Like we kind of keep it like very vague and very open so that people can just basically like interpret it in their own way. Hey Goose, how's it going? But yeah, I think a bunch of talent in there. It's gonna be really cool to see it all come together. Um, just 4 weeks to go, so gonna be crazy. Hmm. But what else has been happening? How is everyone else doing in the chat? Everyone keeping up with things? I think yesterday we spent like a bunch of time um in our community chat kind of just talking about like what happened to the Concord studio, Firewalk, and also like Neon Koi, like two studios that unfortunately just got shut down yesterday, which is fucking crazy to think about. I mean, not uncommon in this day and age, but just thinking about the whole concept that like PlayStation just like what was it, like a year ago bought that studio. Then they released Concord. Concord obviously didn't do well. And then they just completely shut it down, which is just crazy. I can get it from like a pure business perspective. I can get it, right? But just thinking about like the damage that does on like, well, first of all, like the portfolio from PlayStation, right? Because they had like a really good team. And this is also like a really new team as well. Like this was their first game that they were making, from what I can understand. They were formed in 2018, got a triple A team together, and then immediately started pushing out like a new IP, like a triple A IP, which is just really unheard of, right? That's crazy. And then taking that big gamble didn't pay out, and then here we are. It's just, yeah, it's sad. I mean, there's not too much to say about it. It's just, it's so weird that like from like a business perspective, like PlayStation just didn't see that coming, right? I always find those things like really weird, where like in a year development time, sure, a lot happens for sure, but they decided to, based on what they probably seen at those studios, just acquire them, right? Like not even have like a partnership or do like a third party thing or something like that. They just literally just acquired them, and then shutting them down like a year later, which is nuts. I mean, I don't know too much about it, of course, but I was reading like the articles yesterday. It's just crazy. Just doesn't really make sense to me, especially looking from like the bottom up. Like I I don't know. Like the more that this stuff happens, it becomes like just more and more difficult to understand. You know? Hi Tim, how's it going? Good, good. Yeah, doing good. Um, we went through like the team challenges. Teams have been ramping up their work, and the rest of it, like sort of the rest of the stuff that I was doing is kind of at a standstill now. I'm doing like a bunch of stuff in the meantime, trying to streamline the workshops. We've outsourced the workshops, like the video editing, um to like a person who just got back with like all the files. So a couple of days ago, they sent over like the files, and we had a look at like the first edit, which was really good already. So yeah, that's kind of exciting. We're kind of jumping from like sad to like happy. Like it's a fucking roller coaster over here, you know? But yeah, that edit came out really good. We're doing some final tweaks, and then hopefully what we can do in the future, and this is kind of why we're like reaching out to outsource and kind of having like a video editor, like sort of like freelance on the team or whatever that can turn out to be, is that we can, in the hopes that we can double the amount of workshops that we're going to do. Like that's the goal that we have currently. So instead of like one per month, we can hopefully scale it up to like 2 a month. Then we'll see where we go from there. But yeah. Brandon is saying it is sad, and I feel for the developers without having all the info. It is tough, but it must have been hard on those who just wanted to make a game. I mean, it's always like that, right? And then especially getting brutalized like by all the comments online, which you obviously have like the what would we call them, like armchair game developers, where they don't really know how the games industry work, but they don't really know how the financials work, and then they just blame like a singular thing, and then they tell them good riddance, like you should be fired, right? Getting that sort of like harassment, not direct harassment, but like those comments just being out there and being widespread after this all happens is just crazy. Like just people just dogpiling on it. Like it's ridiculous. Like I can get it. Like triple A's is like in this weird space where it's so it is so risky to do anything because everything that you want to do on like a triple A level costs like a shit ton of money, right? And that means that the more money gets involved, the bigger the hopeful payout will be, or else if it's not, then that means the end of the studio, right? It feels like AAA has been on that like nice edge for the longest time, but it feels like it's really cranking up like in like the last 5 years, where like budgets are like spiraling out of control, but like people still expect like the quality and the quality to go up and up and up, right? I mean, not only like the expectation, but that's what the market kind of decides, right? There's a real hunger for like these open world kind of live service like kind of games, and there's a lot of potential in that space, I feel too. Um, despite of what people are saying, right? I think there's a lot of noise going out from people now where they don't want that anymore. But then if a good one comes around, then they're like, oh yeah, I absolutely love that one, right? So it's like they kind of hate that it's like a trend and that it's pushing so many so many studios to be like less risky. But yeah, that's kind of like when you play at that level, that's kind of what you're gonna get, right? A bit like the stock market crashing, games just getting too expensive, too big and too expensive. Well, I think that's sort of like what the motto has always been, right? Like triple A has always been about like better graphics, bigger worlds, more detail, more advanced like storytelling, or like more deepening storylines, or whatever aspect you pick from that, right? It's always about like more detailed or bigger and better. And compared to like making a game like 10 years ago, like the expectations and the technology is completely different, right? Now we can make stuff look really good, but it also means that we have to spend like a massive amount of time of making it actually that good, right? Like the web of studios that are like intertwined with like in just like any development now, where you have outsourcers, co-developers, and all those kind of things, and then the main studio itself is like multiple hundreds of people. Like all of that, like that just adds like complexity to the mix, where it becomes really hard to keep track of, especially if you are not involved with those processes, right? So for example, that's why I also think that like smaller I mean, this is not going to be controversial at all, right? But like smaller teams definitely have an easier way of making things more cohesive because they only need to talk to like a small amount of people compared to multiple hundreds, if not multiple thousands of people, right? And having them like all toe the same line. That is crazy. Like there is a downside to that as well. And I think the downside is definitely that you have less flexibility, right? In the entire game development pipeline. And that also like the communication needs to be on another level, right? It needs to be the best of the best so that everyone is kind of working towards the same vision. If that doesn't work, then you see things falling apart where like one aspect might be really good, but another aspect is just not fitting in with like how the other aspect works, right? So for example, what would you say? What would be a good example? I haven't played too many of the recent games, But in like very broad terms, you could have what would be an appropriate example here? Let me think. Most of it is probably going to come down to storytelling, right? Like the narrative that has been portrayed in like a lot of games is being elevated to like the next level. But then if some of the other things don't follow, some of the other aspects don't follow. Like for example, a simple one would be like motion capture, right? So you have like this really emotional storyline, but then like the motion capture and the facial animations of like the characters, the tech is not there, and like the team is limited in what they can do. Then there's going to be a disconnect between those two things because they're not working towards like the same thing, or they can't because there's like a limitation somewhere. And that happens on like, I just brought up like one thing now, but there's like hundreds, if not thousands of these things that happen in like a development of a game, right? And then having like the overview and control over all of that and finding what to tweak and what makes sense to not spend time on. It's just gets chaotic. But yeah. Yeah, it doesn't feel like the stock market crashing though. Like it definitely, like the industry is definitely going through the ringer right now, for sure. But like the quality of the games is still there overall, right? I feel like there's a lot of companies that deal with outdated technology where you can tell that they're not like as flexible as they once were, and that's kind of like introducing like a lack of innovation, right? Something can be said about Bethesda potentially, like that there is something there looking from the outside in that like they're being hampered by the technology, right? And they've done a massive investment into like the new engine, and you can see the difference, but you could then also argue that the difference wasn't good enough in comparison to other studios out there with more current day tech, or the common comparison, Unreal Engine, right? Hello, Tobias. Yeah, it is all sad. I don't want to keep lingering on this topic for too long. We do have some feedback to get to. It's just, yeah, it's just interesting. And like, if anyone has like questions about this kind of stuff in the chat, feel free to ask them, and I'll see if I can like shine a light on it, because I know that a lot of this stuff can be like really confusing, especially if you're new or if you're still on the outside of the games industry. But yeah, just, yeah. Oh, great. But what I am excited about is that there's a whole bunch of people that are now splitting off on like big development studios, and they're making their own studios, and they're probably like driven by a need to work within smaller teams and make smaller projects. And I think we're gonna see like a boom in like indie or like AA development, depending on where the split is. And I'm really excited about that. I think we're gonna see like sort of like a renaissance in terms of like games come up, and like very innovative projects. But like with just like the way that like the development times are now, it will take a couple of years before we kind of see the impact of that, right? And especially if you're on the outside and you're a junior looking for like a job in the industry, like that is not going to help you now, because those people that will spin off and like make their own companies, they will look for people with a lot of experience first before they can then expand and hire like juniors in when they need them, right? As someone trying to get my first job, I've been seeing it as growing pains for the industry. Yeah, it's a shift. It's because this is not something new, right? Like the like CEOs and like business people realizing that like the trajectory of like AAA studios and like the development budgets, and that like some of the marketing or like the business aspects were like unsustainable, right? So for example, that is why we have live service, because that was probably just like invented to just like get like more recurring revenue in the company, right? Rather than always relying on like, hey, we make like a blockbuster video game, sells once, and then we'll hopefully make like a DLC, and then we go underground for like another 8 years again to then hopefully make like another blockbuster game, right? Which is kind of crazy to think about that is the way, like the normal way of doing things, right? Because that is such a huge gamble just by itself. By hoping that you kind of strike it big, that you make an awesome game and that it sells a lot and that the marketing works out and that it's right on time and whatever. Um yeah, it's a huge gamble, right? And it's just like even crazier now because there's so many games on the market, right? I don't know. Like the AAA games market is definitely different, but you could have a look at like the amount of games that get released on Steam. And I think last year, I don't know what the exact number was, but I think it was like 17,000 or something like that, right? So there's more choice than there's ever been for people that want to play games. And you have to compete with like a lot of that too, which is crazy. But yeah, with anything like that, it also opens up opportunities for people to be more to like have more niche games, right? Where people can make something that is, for example, not combat driven, and that is just more about farming and just want to have a chill time. Because even in Stardew Valley, you still have like a combat aspect, right? To kind of still cater to those people. But we have games now that don't even have combat in them, and there is like a niche for that, which is interesting. So we're getting a more nuanced like games market, I think, which is interesting. Irfan is asking, what would you say are the most essential things to showcase in a portfolio to get a job as a 3D environment artist? Storytelling. Storytelling is by far like the most important thing that you would need to showcase now. Because there's a whole bunch of people that make like interesting, well, like technically well made things for their portfolio, right? They make like a really cool gun, or they make a really nice looking medieval cart. Those assets, they do show that you can sort of execute on the craft, right? That you have like the skill set to execute and to make something from like A to B. But they don't really show like a deeper understanding in what you're trying to convey, right? In my opinion, like it is more clear than ever that a lot of stuff that we try to do in video games is storytelling. Like it is just from like the characters to the world to like the locations that we build, like all of that stuff comes from storytelling. So that is by far like the most essential thing. In a lot of cases, you can kind of make it very you can kind of add it on to the end, right? Um for example, I think we had a couple of people like in the showcase before the stream started, where they will have an asset, and then I will talk to them on Whip Wednesday, and they present the asset without anything, right? They just have like the asset itself in like a white box, but it's not really. It's a nice looking asset, but it's not really saying anything, right? If you then take like the next level and you do something like let's see, for example, Anton here, right? A person who we're going to be talking about today, you can kind of see that like just adding like a couple of books, adding like a bit of cloth, and adding like a wall and like a floor piece adds so much already, because now I have a deeper understanding of what this scene might be, right? Like what kind of a scene is this? And how do we as people like connect to that scene rather than it just being in like a white box. So yeah, storytelling is by far the most important thing. I'm also looking at it from like a perspective that a lot of people now, with the availability of so many resources and so many tutorials, they can get to a decent point of technical understanding and somewhat artistic understanding, but they forget that the storytelling like takes it to the next level. That's why I'm hammering on this. And it's interesting to see from when I kind of started that most of the struggles were still people trying to understand like the technical fundamentals and like the artistic fundamentals, right? And I'm talking about myself here, where my job in the industry, I could bake, but barely, right? Where right now the people that you hire as like a junior, they can definitely bake. They know about trim sheets. They know about like a bunch of different workflows. They've probably made like multiple environments, probably made like multiple like assets, right? I could do like the environment side, but I couldn't do the singular asset side. So there's a lot more, the skill ceiling has kind of gone up. Hello, McFal. Do you always stand up streaming? I try to. Yeah, I try to make it a habit. It's not been consistent though. So that's why you might have not noticed it before. Okay, cool. But thanks for those questions though. Like, feel free to ask questions. We're gonna go into some feedback now. So we're gonna start out with Dennis. Dennis is over here making a medieval project, which I always love to see. Dennis is saying the small side project comes closer to an end. The main work is done and I'm currently focused on level art and polishing. I like where this is going, though there are still some blank areas in the scene that I'm unsure how to fill. For example, the zone with the tables feels too empty for me. Zone with the tables. Zone with... Oh, this area over here. Well, this is actually like an interesting showcase of like, what is this place, right? We kind of have like a little sprinkles here, but they kind of just get consumed by the colors of the scene and they don't jump out too much, right? So what I'm talking about here is we have an example of this asset, right? Which is like a tavern sign. But this doesn't really help us with like visibility, right? Because I didn't see that. Like I'm kind of drawn to it because I'm going to make assumptions about like what a medieval tavern and all that kind of stuff is like, right? But if you don't really showcase it, like it's really hard to understand what that is, right? What we could do with that is if we really want to showcase that this is a tavern, we kind of need to bring forward like more elements that kind of make it a tavern, right? So that sign is actually a good one. I think it's just like misplaced, right? So you could potentially just add it here and make it a bigger part of like the actual building. Or you could change the colors. I think in, what's the game called again? Damn it, I use it as a reference. Let me see if I still have it. Would Pippin and Merry dancing on the tables? I mean, that could be a way to go. Could be a way to go, depending on what kind of vibe you want to set. Kingdom Come Deliverance, that's the one. So I'll share some references, right? Like if this thing ever opens up. To decide. Colors, right? Like what you will see in Kingdom Come Deliverance is that their signs are painted, right? Like very vivid colors. And that is kind of like a really good blend between, they would probably do that. Like, well, to be fair, they probably wouldn't, because from what I've read, depending on what time you're set in, like they wouldn't even have signs. Besides the point, we're kind of building for a game, so we kind of need signature anyway, right? That's where we kind of deviate from like history a little bit. But if I can look at some of the signs here, I don't know if I have them saved. Yeah, look at this. This is a sign in the game, right? Everything else, brown, boring looking. This sign stands out because it has like a dash of color, right? Which is really interesting to play around with in terms of like asking a person to pay attention to like a certain item, right? So doing that, especially with like the gold, they wouldn't have painted it gold, but it kind of has like a nice shimmer. Again, because everything else is just wood and kind of the same roughness, it kind of has like a nice shimmer to it, right? That's probably like a very, very art directed kind of way of presenting it. Yeah, that could be one way. That could be one way of doing it. You kind of have like all the beer stuff outside already, which is pretty cool. I would generally look at making this building less straight as well. It's not really relevant to what we're talking about, but I'm just gonna point it out here. Add some crookedness to it, like add some bending. That's always gonna look like really nice. But yeah, think about like what makes a tavern a tavern. Like maybe even having like a cart, like a delivery cart, right in front of the building could be cool. What does that cart deliver? Maybe it delivered beer kegs, right? Like very recognizable. Just some beer kegs on a cart, and you've made them already anyway. You might as well just like throw them on a cart. I think you have a cart as well, right? So you kind of have this guy. I would, instead of like shoving it to the side or like to the back, I would probably focus on a singular angle. And this is probably going to be the main shot, right? Like this is like the most impressive shot. This kind of has like everything in it. I would honestly put that cart more in the foreground, so that we immediately understand like, oh, this is a tavern because we have the sign, we have the beer cart, all that kind of stuff, right? It's about being deliberate with just that opening shot. And this is the same in a game, right? Let's say we're coming from the main road, and this is more like a secluded thing. You kind of want to hit them with like, oh, it's this kind of a location. And then you allow them to explore like the back areas and all that kind of stuff. And then you can be more intricate with those things, right? So, yeah, tavern, beer kegs, anything else that could link to a tavern, right? When are you doing this now? I'm about to begin grading some assignments from my students. That is awesome. Best of luck. How many do you have to go through? Just going through people's work at the same time. Let's see. So I like where it's going, but I have some blank areas in my scene and I'm sure how to fill. For example, the zone where the table is filled to empty. I would appreciate any suggestions. Oh yeah, so we kind of got deviated, like sidetracked by the storytelling, right? If you want to make these look more interesting, there's a couple of things that you could potentially do. Is either have some sort of kind of like exterior structure that kind of offers some shelter potentially, right? So like, I don't know, some you obviously have to be careful with where you put it because you don't want to block too much of the house. Like having some of these tents, you know, where they kind of constructed like a beer garden or something like that on the outside, right? Something like that could be cool. And then you can just like fill up like more of the area with just like a couple more barrels here and there. Couple more barrels. What else could we do? What would they have? I would probably work a lot more with like terrain stuff, where you have like a separation between like the grass and the dirt, but I would honestly play around more with like a darker layer of dirt, and then maybe have like a lot of footsteps, and also like the same that you're doing here, right? Like have the planks on the floor, make more of that, right? Like maybe even have like an area that is like fully planked up, and then you have like a couple of tables here, and then you have like sand right next to it, kind of just making most of the use of what you already have by being creative with the things, right? Like you have planks, just use them in like a way where you can kind of make like a raised area of the terrace, and then you just have like the terrace that is on the floor, and that adds like some interesting variation. Subtle signs of a drunken brawl, says Random, like a quickly repaired window or one part of the fence that's broken. I think maybe you're slightly hinting at that with these planks potentially already. I think that could be cool. It just depends on what you want to do with the scene, right? But definitely with like a medieval scene like this, you really have to focus a lot on the natural elements, right? And like really make them like really detailed. That is why I did spend like a whole bunch of time trying to make my terrain look like really layered up, right? And I'll show you what I mean, because it's been a while. So let me see. This is an example of the floor that I had in my scene, right? And like you can see that I kind of tried to do the same thing, where I have my grass, I have my dirt, and then I have my mud in the middle. And I then like emphasize that mud by like adding decals with puddles and all that kind of stuff. And then you can also add decals on top of the wooden planks to kind of make it feel like people have been driven over them and all that kind of stuff. Once that like starts working together to create like a consistent scene, like that's where the beauty comes in, right? Like in those like details, especially because you're you kind of have to rely on them, right? Like a lot of detail in like the natural elements is going to be crucial for like a medieval project. Yeah, my good old medieval project. Yeah, you can kind of see, right? Like this is my base terrain, and even like the base terrain has like footprints and all that kind of stuff in it already. And then I kind of like clean it up, add like I think that's like a road spline that goes through the whole thing, but it adds like more depth to the whole thing, right? Because you can kind of do the same thing here, but what I would do is I would use road splines that actually have like a mesh, right? So the way that I did it is if we're looking from the side, right? I have like, let's imagine this is top down again, so this is going to be really confusing, but this is like a track of a cart, right? Then what I would do is I kind of would have like a build up and have like sort of a build up and then a track here, and that's it. And that would be my actual mesh that I then would use on this whole thing, right? And then you would create like really interesting pathways that you can kind of use to like funnel you down, right? And then that additional layer comes in where like you make the deepest points, like the points where you go down to the lowest point, you add like a decal that just makes that area wet. Because now we're thinking about like, oh, if it rains, that's where the mud collects, so we're probably going to paint more mud here as well, but the spline is going to go through it, so it looks like a cart came through, kind of got dragged through the mud and kind of like tracked the mud with it for a little bit, right? It's just, it adds that layer of complexity, which is currently missing. And even if you were to do that on this area over here, it's going to bring the whole thing is gonna make the whole thing come to life, right? It doesn't have to be mud, but like more variations in texture could definitely help. Hello, Sia! How are you doing? I love this mud texture of yours, but it's really complicated to make. I mean, yeah, it could be. I mean, I'm not going to deny that like making tileable textures is not it's tricky, right? Especially if you're not that advanced with it yet. What you could do, in your case is have the texture that you have currently. Just try to find like a good like roughness look, right? Like just focusing on the roughness by itself. And then do whatever you want to do after it. So with whatever I mean, maybe you add footprints instead of like tracks or something like that, right? Try to layer it up and think about it in iterations. Because yeah, like you can get some really cool stuff going, right? Because you're adding a lot of directionality, you're adding a lot of movement to the scene. If you use a spline mesh, could you also paint vertex color on it? I think so. Yeah. I think that would allow you to do that too. Yeah, you can see I use this technique like a lot, right? I'll see if I can find like another area here. But like the blend of like grass and like sand and then the wetness in between, like that variation like is also really good in directing the eye too. Yeah. You can make models of patches of terrain you see in Megascans, but they're more expensive than material and decals. Yeah, you could do that. Yeah, splines, that's the way that I did like all those tracks. So like whenever you see those tracks, like I think this is like a great one of showing it off. Oh, this is where RVT broke, so maybe not. Let me actually see. I wonder if I have like a screenshot here. So it's like, this is again one of those examples where the foreground here, all that really wet stuff, that is all decals, right? But then the tracking of the mud, like the actual mud tracks here, like they are a spline. So I have like two splines like kind of merging into each other. And then because it's the deepest point, I add like these decals that then get projected onto those splines as well, right? So we're adding like an additional layer here. Plus, that also gives me the benefit of like trying to hide the seams as well, because that spline coming from the left is intersecting with the spline on the right. So I didn't just cover it up with like a decal of a puddle and just fixed, right? Yeah, you can kind of see here, right? Like when a lot of splines are just like intersecting, you have to do like a lot of massaging, a lot of cleanup, and like the terrain needs to work together. But like if it starts doing that, it becomes really nice to play around with. Cool. Yeah. But I think that's the main thing that I would definitely say. Try to focus more on the terrain, right? So the 2 points that I want to bring up is point number 1, definitely terrain. And point number 2 is definitely adding character. Right? That's the thing that I brought up with trying to make your building less straight. Kind of really make it shabby, make it crooked, make it like add like a lot of character, right? And you can do that in multiple ways. What you could do is you could collapse it all in like your your modeling program, right? Or you could collapse it all in Unreal, and then even in Unreal, well, in Unreal it may or may not work. Depends on the complexity of the mesh that you have. But you could then use like the move brush, the sculpt brush inside of Unreal to just like squish and pull stuff. And it kind of gives like a more unique look, right? But those are the two things that I would definitely focus on. And then maybe a third one could be playing with the atmospherics, right? Like focus more on the mood. Make it really moody. Wouldn't it break vertex paint? Not too sure actually. If you do it through your modeling, you might need to do like vertex paint again. Depending on how complex that is, it may or may not be. Well, no, it is definitely worth doing it. So even if it would break vertex paint, and you have to redo it afterwards, like I would still tell you to do it. Because like the vertex paint is nice, but if like the model itself looks like really rigid and like really 3D, then it doesn't matter if we have like vertex paint on it now, right? If it would break it, that's something to try. That's why I'm saying like the times that I tried it, I kind of didn't even get to that point because the buildings that I was making were pretty complex in the amount of stuff that I was adding to them. And if I would then combine them, it would fuck up like all the materials. So, yeah. In my scene, I ended up with a mix between the two, I think. So I have like modular buildings for the more boring like peasant buildings, right? And then I have like more unique buildings made with the same pieces, but then collapsed into a unique building. That's the way that I ended up approaching it. Yeah, thanks, Dennis. Looking nice though. I like where this is going. Also, a good choice of making it way smaller than it was before, because yeah, that was not going to work out. Not to the same quality that you're trying to do it now, right? Like, it's really hard to make something of that scale to like a higher quality level. So, good choice. And also, the suggestion of Brand Doom could still work though, like making patches of terrain in Megascans. You could do the same thing too. I think I did the same thing with, I have like mud. I have like mud piles basically. And I can just like sync those against building to kind of have like a buildup of mud or stuff like that. Could be really, really interesting to work with too. Cool. Moving on to Anton. Anton is working on the cabinet. I want you to ask for some feedback. What looks unrealistic, or maybe I lost some important information in the textures of the prop. Now I'd like my lighting setup, but it's not the final presentation. Hello, hello. You mean export the full building to Blender and assign the lattice modifier to it? That could be one way. Yeah. Exactly. That's exactly what I mean with that. Sure. We have like, I don't know, this image here as well, which I don't know. Yeah, we can look into it. But I don't think that anything really stands out here. Oh, there is one thing. There is one thing that I wanted to say. We're gonna scoot down though. The thing that I wanted to bring up is the feet. The feet of this cabinet. It's a tiny thing, but those tiny things like make a huge difference. Especially when you see it here. I would add like a tiny bevel so that as the foot of the thing comes down, kind of have like a tiny bevel. This is over exaggerated, right? So don't make it as big as it is here. But this is basically to kill like that 3D look again, right? We don't want to make things look like they're 3D. So adding like a little bevel there is going to give us like a little bit of AO and like a little bit of shadow underneath it, instead of just being like completely flat, like 100% flat with the floor, right? We want to give that illusion. The rest of it is looking really nice though. And I got some more dirt and grittiness going on, which is looking nice. Yeah, all the details are looking really good too. And the way that they're integrated into the design, really nice. So that transition where you use then this texture on top of it, looks really cool. That looks real nice. Are the back panels here, these guys? Like, are they parallax by any chance? Is that parallax occlusion mapping? Same for these guys as well. Is that also parallax? Yeah, that's a great use of parallax. That is an amazing use of parallax. That's honestly like the typical use case for POM, right? Like, just having that on all the patterns is just a really great choice. So that is awesome. Yeah, no, it's looking really nice. See, why you're not erasing? Here we go. Yeah, that's a great choice. I'm curious to see what you're gonna do with your lighting setup and like the presentation, because that is honestly the biggest thing that's going to make like a huge difference at this point, right? Like, really, like we were talking about before, like really selling it and like really building a sort of story around this prop is going to be the biggest thing that you can do at this point, right? Because you've done a great job on the asset itself, the textures look great. So that's going to be the next step, where you really want to take your time with that and think about the story, right? Like, I think we talked about it last time as well a little bit, but like, did you find this on your grandpa's attic, or did you find it on like Facebook Marketplace, or did you find it in like a like an antique store, right? Like, there's so many cool things that you can do with a prop like this. Could be interesting, because you could even do this thing where the scene itself is an antique store, right? And maybe like Megascan has like a bunch of like old looking stuff that you can just like stack into shelves and stuff. And then you could make this like story around it, that you are like an antique hunter and you found this like really cool looking like cabinet, right? In between like all the other stuff in the antique store. That kind of depends on what Megascans has available and all that kind of stuff, but yeah, explore that a little bit. That's definitely going to be the most important thing. Yeah. Let me add a note here. So, a little bevel. Then number one thing is storytelling. So important. Cool. Yeah, looking really nice. A couple of things here on the topology then, since you shared it in the chat. I would have a look at all these areas again, because they are really dense for like no real reason, right? I would even say that some of these like edges are unnecessary. Let me actually look. Yeah, a lot of that stuff doesn't really matter that much. A lot of those edges can just go. Like, if you just have like Well, you do have like a little lip here, right? So I guess you need like that little lip. Something like that. You can simplify it a lot if you wanted to. Because it doesn't need to be as dense as you think it needs to be. And then probably the same can be said here. That cylinder can just be like, I don't know, 8-sided or something like that. So I'm just gonna highlight like a couple of areas that you could potentially look at. I think the rest of it kind of makes sense because you got these hinges, right? And oh, interesting. I thought these were baked down. You kind of look and feel baked down because they're pretty flat, right? So that's interesting. I mean, I don't mind them being geometry, right? I don't really mind that. You know what it might be? Let's have another look. Yeah, I think what it might be is that this one reads really nice because it's coming out of the object more compared to this guy, which seems to be like slightly rotated to go into the door, which kind of makes it read like really flat. So that would be like a really easy fix, right? Like just take all geometry, put your pivot point here and just like rotate it just slightly, like 1 or 2 degrees maybe, to kind of just have like the same effect that you have here, right? Because that looks good. It's kind of catching like a nice shadow. It kind of reads as like actual depth. Whereas this one, it reads as like nice little depth here, but then it kind of goes into the door over here. I think if you want to kind of give that effect, if that effect is on purpose, it would be interesting if you can kind of curve it somehow. So then like the bottom might go into the door, but then the top kind of comes out of it more. Something like that. That you can kind of read it as like, oh, this is like damaged, right? I have a lot of edges at some point because I used weighted normals to smooth my edges without baking. That is... That's kind of a shame. I'm not gonna lie. Like I was assuming that like a lot of this was like baked down and like was high to low poly baked. I mean, it's not that there's necessarily anything necessarily bad with it. It's just in like a studio setting, like this prop would just be like baked down, right? It would be a unique texture, all the assets would be baked down, all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of like the reason why I'm like a little bit disappointed is just because that is not really applicable in like most studio environments. Yeah. That doesn't take away from it looking good and it being like well thought out, right? Well thought out as in like, oh, I'm gonna use palm here, I'm gonna use trim sheet here. Like it's very balanced in that way. Yeah. Those are some like areas that I would look at. Even with that in mind, even with you bringing up that you use like a higher poly count for weighted normals, you can still optimize a lot of this, like for sure. Like there's no reason why this guy needs to be as dense as it currently is. There's also no reason why this one is as dense, right? So you can definitely make some optimizations. Got it. Nice one. Yeah, like I said, it doesn't take away from like the beauty of this thing, right? Really nice. Yeah, great stuff, Anton. Great stuff. Hey, Joe. How's it going? Okay, moving on. Thank you for sharing your work, Anton. That's really appreciated. I'm really looking forward to see what you're gonna do with it. By the way, like the presentation, the lighting, what you still have in mind for that. I'm excited. It'll be cool. Next one up, Sanji. Sanji, let's go. Have a look. Thank you for the feedback. No worries. Happy to help. Yeah, this... I'm not gonna lie. This is self-critique here, right? It's critique for myself. Last time we talked, I was really down on this scene. I think it was just because... Well, I'll expand on that even. I was undeservingly down on the scene. I think it was just because there were talks about you moving on to like another project, and it was like, okay, then we can't really do too much here. But then the project kind of kept going on, and I don't know, there was a whole bunch of stuff going. I think it was undeserved from my side to be so down on it. I think we got to like a good end result, right? With like the overpaint and stuff. I'm happy about that. In the beginning, could have been more positive about the whole thing, because you still put like a whole bunch of work into it, right? So yeah, and I think this final update, I think it is final. Yeah, you say final. So yeah, this is awesome. Massive improvement. This scene now has a soul, right? Like this scene, there's something happening in it. We can smell and we can taste, we can kind of have a feeling of what is expected of us, right? In this scene. Like I imagine that if I'm going through this town in like the Italian countryside somewhere, this small town, and there's like a festival going on, I imagine the smell of just like lots of like nice things, you know, like nice fresh foods, like nice coffee, all that kind of stuff going on. That's what I'm getting the feeling from now, right? We're getting like the soul of this place is coming out more. So yeah, I would say great job on that. Like massive improvements compared to last time. I think he did really good. I think also just really well done on the because you only had like a week left, right? Like trying to squeeze like the most time out of your limited amount of time that you had by focusing on the banners, because they add a lot of festivity to the whole scene, right? And then making the most of it too was a good choice. See you, Dennis. Have a great evening. So I think that was a good choice. Like going for the banners, we kind of have like a stereotypical Piaggio like scooter in the front, which is looking really nice, very Italian, right? And like a car to kind of fill it up in the background. So good choices all around. Since this is the final, I'm probably just mostly gonna focus on like a couple of final tweaks that we can do at this point. Like not like just post-processing, all that kind of stuff, right? I would say the first thing to have a look into is a vignette. A vignette is basically just like darkened borders around the edges, right? So that we focus on the core of the scene more. Give it like a nice fictional name as well. Because sometimes, and this comes down to storytelling again, right? I'm freaking excited when I see like storytelling opportunities, like a fictional name of like a place where it kind of leans into the storytelling, right? Where if you kind of spin like your own name onto it, and it's kind of in line with like what most like smaller cities in Italy have, like it kind of adds to the vibes, right? Rather than just calling it like Italian countryside, you know? Like it's so generic, it's so boring, and it kind of just like it kind of, I don't know, it kind of just like dulls the whole thing, in my opinion. Where like if you called it like, I don't know, sunset at like Rio Maggiore, right? Like something like that is like, oh my god, Like it kind of has like an interesting name. Rio Maggiore is like an actual name, so don't use that one. But hey, I feel like you can come up with a better fictional name. But yeah, lean into the fantasy, right? Maybe even think about like this is something that just popped into my head. Maybe you could make it like a postcard or something, right? And I'm talking about like you could have like your main shot. Oh god, how are we gonna do this? I know that this is just for I think it's for a submission, right? Like a submission for school, I think. Not too sure. But if it is for that, like you might not have too much more time. But what I'm imagining is I'm imagining like a wooden table that has like this old postcard on it with maybe like, I don't know, like another postcard with like generic picture underside it. And this is like your scene, right? And then you can call it like, oh, Rio Maggiore. Up, you can add that onto the postcard. And that becomes a presentation of your scene rather than just having like this scene just by itself. Like a little postcard. And then it kind of adds to like the whole vibes again, right? Like I'm imagining that I got like this postcard from like my grandparents when they were like visiting like the small town in like Italy or something like that. You know, like that's what I'm imagining when I think about that. It kind of pulls on like the emotional heartstrings a little bit. It kind of leans into it more. Tala, thank you so much for asking the question. If you want to join the feedback, the only way that you can do that is by becoming a member. It is a paid Discord server, but I do this on like a weekly basis. So yeah, if you want to get feedback every Wednesday, feel free to become a member on beyondexcent.com and then join us in the Discord. That's the best way of doing so. Let's see. I think that's pretty much it. I would kind of just like focus on like squeezing the maximum amount out of like the scene that's already there. Play around with like a little bit of like post-processing, a little bit of color grading, giving the place like a fictional name, like doing the presentation. Focus on all that stuff now, right? Focus on the breakdowns too. Like give us some like really nice looking breakdowns. Well, you don't have to give me them. It's more for to increase your future chances in the industry, right? Pick a prop that you did, probably like the most well thought out and most interesting looking prop, and break that down, right? So ideally one prop, like let's say the hero prop, and then everything you've made yourself, and add that to the breakdowns. But that's about it. We're going to keep it pretty simple for this, right? Because it's mostly focused on like post-processing, all that kind of stuff. There's enough here already. You kind of just put like the little dots on the eye, like tweak a couple of things that you still want to tweak. But focus on the small things. Don't do any big changes anymore and just hand it in if that's the case. Yeah. Thank you, Sanji. Best of luck. And like Adam is saying in the chat as well, or like in the Discord rather, Adam is saying that this has improved so much since I last saw it. It's awesome. And I agree. I agree. So I used to be a member to Patreon earlier. Now it's moved to the website of Beyond Extent, right? Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's our own website. So we do have like a bunch of resources on there that we couldn't do on Patreon, and we have plans to do like more interesting things in the future that we can only do on our website. That's why we had to move to our own platform, because it gives us more flexibility for future things that we have planned. So I know it's annoying, and I'm sorry that there couldn't be like a transferal, like a transfer from like credentials, but yeah, unfortunately, we have to get through this, and then we can make some cool stuff together. Cool. Next one up, Alexander. Let's read what Alexander's working on. I spent this week working on the composition, and I think I've reached a really nice point. Thanks for the tips. Yep, I agree. Like, I had a look at this before the stream. It's looking really nice. Drastically changed the lighting and created a new design for the symbol. Now I'm starting to incorporate something like an iron and glass style for the castle. I think it worked very well for the bridge, but not so much for the castle. Oh my god, they should change the giant circle gate in the back to the BE logo. No, don't say that. Well, everything needs to be easier. Oh my god. There are, to be fair, there are people doing that in the team challenges now. And I hope that I get some like nice surprises where I haven't noticed it and they kind of snuck it into the background. That's going to be interesting to see. Yeah, so we've got like some very intricate looking architectural style coming in. And it worked. Alexander thinks it worked well for the bridge, but not necessarily for the castle itself, right? We're gonna have a look at that in begin. It's up, it's still a block out, and I want to spend a good amount of time on it. It's a stage I've always neglected, and later on the issues. Later notice the issues after finish the whole environment. Yep, yeah. It's always good to spend a lot of time here so that you have a good foundation before we start moving on. Let me see. It is a very unique style. I do agree with what you're saying, that it works better for the bridge compared to the structures themselves, right? Because it kind of defeats the purpose of having walls if you can just like run straight to them, right? From like architectural point of view, right? Or like defensive point of view or something like that. Because that's like the main reason why they would build big walls, right? To potentially keep like other people out, right? Otherwise, there would be no need. So I think if you want to incorporate those like same elements onto those walls, you kind of have to think about like the sort of like core design elements, like the core shapes and like the repetition of those shapes, and then kind of probably in this way make them like integrated in a more subtle way, right? Where like the wall can still be like this massive defensive position, but then you could add those patterns like in different ways on top of it. So where we keep, and also we kind of want to keep in mind that we want to leave some like place to rest as well, for like our eyes to rest, right? Because what happens, you can even see it now, right? Like, I mean, your main focal point is so huge in comparison that it's not necessarily an issue yet. But what you're doing with all this detail is you're asking a lot of attention to these areas, right? Because they're intricate and they're like interesting to look at. So in comparison to something that is like relatively low on detail, like you're gonna introduce like a conflict here, especially when you then also add like materials and all that kind of stuff on top of it with iron and glass, right? That's gonna ask for even more attention than it's currently doing. So I would think about like simplifying those walls and then just being like, okay, we're gonna make the bottom, just gonna make that a simple wall design, right? Then we have like a little lip, and then on top of that lip, then we could maybe start introducing some of those patterns, right? Where you have sort of this patterning going on, right? And they're probably not going to be see-through. But doing something like this instead, that I'm kind of trying to condense like all of the detail to kind of ease up like a lot of visual density, like visual detail on the wall itself. Right, so if we then do that with like all the walls here, I think we're going to introduce like some nice areas of rest. And we're going to make the whole thing like a bit more easier to look at. This is very common in like the 70-30 rule, right? And this is a very common thing in design. I'm not a designer myself, but you could kind of simplify it to, if you have like a shape, you can kind of split it up. Let's say we have this wall here. Dunk, dunk. You have like roughly 70% is area of rest, and then 30% is just detail. Right? That's the way that I'm currently trying to split it up. So if we then like push everything into like the top a little bit more, that's going to give us a nicer visual balance. Plus, also, it's going to work to our favor because now we're going back to what walls are supposed to be, right? Like walls are supposed to be like defensive, like defensive architectural pieces, right? And then you could potentially do the same thing here, because currently the bridge feels like really, really fragile. So you could potentially do like the same thing here, where if we get a color, not that one. If we close that section off. Right, and then maybe we could do something else on top of here. To add like a little bit more detail. Trying to simplify things a little bit, right? Because the issue with this is that it becomes very hard to read again from like an architectural perspective, where this feels so fragile that it doesn't even read like a bridge that people can walk upon, right? So we're kind of trying to get that back in here. Like if you want to push this up, you can do so, right? That's totally up to you. Like let's say you want to make it less chunky, you can kind of play with that variation, but I kind of want to see some sort of like depth going on here so that we can read it more like a bridge. What you're trying to do now, though, is very tricky and takes a lot of time, right? Because you're trying to design. So take a bunch of inspirations, see which ones you like the most. There's a lot of really interesting, like well-designed Parisian architecture, and like even like I guess Central European, right? Where like a lot of the iron work was like very intricate. For example, in Antwerp, we had like a bunch of beautifully designed buildings that kind of have like the same sort of motifs and are very ornate by design. That could be really interesting to look into. But also maybe be like a little bit more adventurous with the kind of shapes that you're trying to set out, right? Like maybe if you're working with these patterns, maybe, let's see. Let's see. What could we do here? Like what I'm trying to do now, it's not the best shape, I'll admit that. But I'm trying to see if we can like break up the shapes, because right now, if we just squint our eyes a little bit, what is happening to the bridge is that it's a long rectangle, right? And like the bottom looks really intricate. Like the top is kind of missing something, right? So maybe we can connect these guys up here. Right? So could be something with that, right? Like maybe breaking the mold a little bit and trying to increase, like make the silhouette of the bridge like a little bit more interesting. Yeah. The consistency is all in the shapes, right? Like the design of the shapes kind of needs to go through like the whole thing. So ideally, what kind of shapes are present on the walls need to then also be present on the bridge, and also potentially be present on like the bigger shape, right? Like it's about the consistency of the design. Hey, Giacomo! How are you doing, buddy? I saw that you're also on the roster from for Berlin Game Grounds. That's gonna be exciting. I was actually having a cheeky look at like the flights yesterday, just to see if it was possible at all, but I guess we'll have to leave it for the next time. But I would love to see all you guys again. Nice top. Oh, thanks, man. Had to be done. I'm getting more and more used to it. I'm way more okay with it now than I was like last week. Such a big adjustment, but I kind of don't mind anymore. Always welcome in Berlin, you know that? Yeah! Yeah, looks like it's gonna be a fun event though. But yeah, like that's about it. Like the consistency of the design. I like what you did with like the foreground. I think that's a good compromise where you can kind of have like a bunch of stuff happening here, and it gives context for the bridge being here as well. That's looking really cool. Overall, way better. I love the focus. The focus on like the main elements now. It feels very focused. Feels really structured. Also the lighting. I feel like the lighting that you've already put in place is going in a really good direction. So yeah, love the choices that you've taken, and it's gonna be cool to see what you're gonna do with it in the future, man. Way better now than like last time, right? Where there was kind of like a mismatch. This feels a cohesive picture. We kind of cleaned up a bunch of stuff too. So awesome work, Alexander. Looking nice. Yeah, Giacomo saying the same thing. Tell me, how does that work? Like are you gonna do portfolio reviews, or is it like a mentorship thing that you're gonna do at Berlin Game Grounds? I think it's like reviews, right? Too sure. Maybe I just read too quickly. Oh, it's a mentor. Okay. How does that work? Do you like continue the mentorship afterwards, or is it just like a single session during the whole event? Basically, student book you and you give them advice. Oh, okay. Yeah. Single session. Nice. Gonna be interesting. Let's have a look. We got a Dinant over here. Okay, so I changed quite a lot, but I'm still pondering on a few things. Should I add more trees, or would it get too crowded? Scale has been improved, but it still feels awesome. How? Not sure why. Overall layout, it feels bland somehow. Like, how can I make it better? Yeah. First things, I would not do a tree. Straight up, trees are very technical and really difficult to get looking right. Yeah, I would honestly not go for a tree. I would honestly focus on the things that you have, focus on the rock sculpting, and then just leave the tree for like another project. Now focus on the foliage. Because to make that tree like look really good, I can tell you now that it's gonna be a headache. So I'm gonna write that down, but I'm gonna give you a suggestion if you wanted to do like with a tree for next time. So that's a huge headache. So no trees. I'll give you like a warning sign as well, because they're so annoying to make. So complex. Complex to make look really good. They're a headache. If you wanted to do a tree, I would probably think about it in a way where you can incorporate them better into the design. So maybe have like a tree that's wrapped around a rock that then has like a staircase built into it or something, right? Like incorporating all the different things that you have now into like one cohesive thing. I don't think adding a tree to this really helped. Oh, Taisto actually said the same thing, where like the tree is kind of more incorporated with the whole rock, right? So yeah, that was actually brought up before, so that feels good. So yeah, if you wanted to do a tree, that's like a side note, right? Like oh, Giacomo, I think you're trying to share a link, right? I think YouTube blocks him. I haven't really found like the thing where you can unblock it. I don't think that's a thing that you can do on YouTube. Sorry, Giacomo. Yeah, I don't even think I have control over that. Not too sure. Not even RStation link? No, like I looked around in the settings where I can allow people to post like links. Hold on. Maybe give it a try now. In the meantime, let's have a look. So yeah, I would definitely not add more trees. That's basically question one, right? Thing two, the scale has been improved, but it still feels off somehow. I don't think that's necessarily down to the scale. It's more about like the composition and the layout, right? So I think number 2 and 3, like both of those points are sort of the same. They kind of have like the same sort of issues. Where I would even say that you have this like cool step up of this rock, but it kind of feels oh no, I can see it now. Okay. Let's have a look. Oh, I saw this floating past. Yeah. Yeah, so if you like integrate like a tree within like the main thing, that always looks good. Even in this scene, right? Like they kind of how would I say it? Like they're very smart about how they use the tree in the scene, right? Because we only see the roots. So in this case, this is a really easy tree to make because it's just tubes with like a tileable on top of it, right? I mean, it's simplifying it a bit, but like that's basically what it comes down to. But then if you want to do like a trunk that kind of grows from like the ground and then has like the leaves and the canopy and all that kind of stuff, that's why trees are so technically difficult. They're really complex because they have so many layers to them, right? Whereas with this one, yeah, something like this would be like easier to do. Yeah, that's looking cool though. It's looking awesome. But yeah, what I would say for number 2 and 3 combined then is yeah, make the layout like more interesting. And I think one way to do that is kind of get away from like the staircase that you have here and maybe build it more into like a staircase that is kind of carved out of the rock. right? So you could have like a staircase leading up to like the main thing, but it's actually carved out of rock instead. And then you would have to, like, the reason why I say that is because now we're adding some like additional verticality to the whole piece. And I think that always like is more interesting than having just like a two-dimensional like flat plane that we have here. Even though it has like some ups and downs, it still feels and looks like just like a 2D plane, right? So that's why my gut instinct, like my artistic instinct, like tells me to like break it up and add more verticality to it. That makes the space always feel like way more interesting. And you can kind of just like break that up into like multiple sections, right? So we're going down here. And we're breaking this up. Let me actually. Right, and then there's like another step here. Like another platform. And then you could potentially do the same thing with the background as well, where like there's more stuff behind it. It's not flat, but we're like trying to make like the background more interesting too. Right, and we're making it like more three-dimensional. And then you build like the staircase into it, and it becomes like way more interesting. And then maybe you could even play into the thematic that you already have set up, right? So maybe this rock formation is also kind of broken now. Maybe you can have like multiple different things that are kind of just like broken off into smaller pieces. Just making it visually more interesting, right? I have like smaller pieces kind of like floating past. Maybe even like detach this one and just have it like floating in midair. Different composition though, but yeah, think about it more in three dimensionalities, right? Always makes the space more interesting, adding some verticality into it. Damn, look at those paint over skills. Hell yeah. Sometimes I wish I could go back to like concept art, you know? I mean, to be fair, I still do that sometimes. Like, I'll just like sketch something, like my tablet, like at night. Haven't done that in a while though. I need to pick that back up. But yeah, I mean, just making it more interesting. You could, and like, if you see this now, if you have like a tree coming from the back of it, maybe it becomes more doable to do a tree. And I'll give you another thing. Maybe you could do, maybe you could even do like a dead tree, right? Like if you want to do it like really cheap, like that's a way to do it. And then don't do the roots because they're hidden behind like a rock somewhere. I'm worried about it becoming too large to handle, and it would be a project I just am afraid to open due to the scale. Well, I think the worst thing you've done to like increase the scope and the scale of the project is adding a tree into it. Like honestly, that's why I just like set up straight up no tree. Don't do a tree. You want to focus on like a singular skill, right? Whenever you're trying to like level up your skill set, you want to isolate those skill sets as much as you can. So get rid of the tree and just focus on the sculpting, right? You don't even necessarily need to make this a portfolio piece that shows that you can do like a thing from A to Z, right? Like where you bake it all down and you texture it, all that kind of stuff. You could just make it a sculpting piece, right? And you just focus on your sculpting things, and then you just post that on your portfolio and just move on to the next thing. There's a lot of people that do that, right? It's about like isolating skills, and then just like leveling them up, right? Like one by one. Because if everything needs to be a portfolio piece that is done from like A to Z, like you're gonna end up in this thing where you're adding too much pressure onto yourself, right? I mean, we've talked a lot. I kind of know like what your skill set is, and you kind of need to be able to kind of take it step by step, right? Then trying to like doing all the things like at the same time. Because the worst thing that can happen is exactly like you said, right? Like where you're afraid to open it due to the scope of the scene. Like that is not a situation where you want to be in, because then it just, what's the point, right? Time to axe the tree. Yeah, do it. Kill the tree. Yeah, and then just like focus more on like sculpting like interesting patches of stones, right? It's gonna be cool. All right, cool. Big shout out to Adam as well, because Adam gave like a bunch of really cool feedback. Let me condense it because I haven't read it yet. Not more trees because it will become too crowded. In my opinion, it's already a bit too crowded, which I agree on. Yeah. Consider only having a tree with a broken off trunk. We talked about that already, but that's like a good solution, right? Like a broken off trunk that allows you to focus on the sculpting rather than having to do like all the technical aspects of a tree, right? Because you're not worried about like the leaves and the canopy and stuff. So that's a good point. You're missing small scale assets to ground the scene, like smaller things. Like that is literally why I sketched all of this stuff, right? Like this is medium and small scale stuff that I just added. That's why they're there, because now we get like a nice like shape hierarchy, right? And obviously you can do that here as well, where you have like a couple of like nice rock formations, like smaller ones, and then you can have like this bigger one here. Let's assume this is like a bigger one. But then you can still like vary it up with like a smaller one. There we go. You can have like a smaller one, and then you got some pebbles around it. Right? Big, medium, small. Main reason I did the trees is to have something other than the rocks to attach chains to. I honestly don't think you need the chains at this point. I think I would probably focus more on just like actually the sculpting of the rocks and like making it like a nice rock formation with like a staircase built into it, than having chains into it. This is always a tricky thing, right? It's like it's a storytelling, right? Like if that fundamentally is like kind of like a little bit shaky, then it becomes like relatively easy to like replace it. So I feel if you wanted to attach more things to the chains, right? If you kind of want to keep like the main boulder grounded, then I would honestly try to think about it slightly different, where we can see what is trying to happen on a visual basis. I'll explain this, right? So let's say I'm gonna do like a miniature drawing. Okay, I'm taking the same elements, right? So we have like the door here, like a little door handle. This is still like the main rock that is trying to fly away, right? And then we add like crisscross chains to it. And they are like, let's see. And they are like attached to like the stones here. Right? Like, I kind of want to see more what's happening here in between like the rock trying to float off. And I would even say, like, imagine like a crater that kind of goes down, so that it can feel that like the crater kind of has been like kind of, I don't know, smushed together and then like pulled out of the ground, right? So I'm trying to show the effect of what is trying to happen and what someone is trying to stop from happening, right? Because someone put the chains on the big stone to kind of keep it somewhat grounded, right? And then you could do like same thing like you have here, like a couple of floating rocks, kind of just come down again. But I think the most important part here is this connection here, like where the rock is kind of just floating off into the distance. Like I kind of want to see why it would be flowing off, of what is causing it to flow off, right? Like I'm imagining this is going to be very stereotypical. Like you would have like a crater like formation here, and they would have like some blue glow underneath it, or like blue veins, and then the underside of the rock like can have those blue veins as well, just to indicate some sort of magic, right? Like with that, I'm kind of trying to showcase like a cause and an effect. Right? So the relationship between the rock floating off and then like the magic making it happen, right? So if you're trying to go for that effect, I would really emphasize that there's like a crater or something below it, right? Because right now all I'm seeing is that there's like a flat piece of rock and there's a floating rock above it, but I'm not getting the connection yet. Like it's like really overemphasizing the connection. Like I'm seeing this, if we were looking at this from like a side perspective, right? I'm almost imagining it being something like this, where this is like the cradle where the rock is like pulled out. But I didn't make it. I was planning to add like 2 crystal types, 2 colors maybe. 2 colors would be too much, right? It would be too confusing. And also like what is always a good thing to keep in mind, and this is you're gonna agree with this as well. You want to simplify things down, right? So the thing that I'm thinking about is I'm literally thinking about like cracks in the rock that you sculpt in, and then maybe you just add like a texture in that or whatever you want to do, right? You could make it like really cheap and kind of have like a plane that sits like in those cracks and kind of just have like a blue emissive glow, kind of to indicate that this is what you want to go for, right? When I say that, I'm imagining like a grayscale render, right? Like what you would see from like Ivana Lichwager, for example, where it's more about the sculpt with like a couple of like details in it, right? Like a couple, let me actually showcase. Actually showcase what I mean here. If we go to like her sculpts, right? It's all about the sculpts. And then she will add like little pops of color, right? Just to indicate that something is happening there. But she's not going all the way and like taking things down, texturing them, all that kind of stuff. It's kind of just like it's a sculpting exercise, but like elegantly taken to like the next level by adding like a pop of color, right? And that's the same thing that I'm thinking for your like scene as well, where you could like sculpt everything that you need to sculpt, and then just add like this like blue emissive glow in some sort of way in those cracks, right? That's why I'm saying my go-to would be like, oh, you can just put like, I don't know, geometry into those cracks, like kind of sink it into the stone, slap like a tileable like blue emissive on it, and you kind of have something there, right? Something to give you the idea that there's something more happening. It just depends on what you want to showcase, right? Because I'm looking at this from like perspective of a sculpting exercise rather than a fully fledged finished portfolio piece, right? If you want to do that, you're going to have to do a lot more stuff. So yeah, that part is up to you, right? What you want to do with it. Probably move the tree, but the scale is actually quite decent. Yeah. Yeah, well, see, that's like, we're looking at this picture here, right? Like the last picture that you posted. It makes a huge difference, like if you actually have like a camera and if we're looking at it from like a first person perspective, right? Because this is really relatable. I like the scale that you have going on here. So this is good. I like what I'm seeing here. This is really good. Yeah. Like Taiso is saying, the rocks look really nice in the engine as well. Yeah. Because like that's the difference, right? Like this is like an almost like orthogonal like camera that we're looking at here. Like very made for like a 3D software, right? But once we actually get it into like a game or like in like an engine, it's gonna look completely different. So yeah. Cool. But thank you for showing your work, Dinant. Best of luck. And keep on cracking on. You just have to honestly, I think the basis is fine. I just need to change and refine stuff and make sure the camera view is a lot better. Yeah. Yeah, simplify, right? Like the base stuff is there. It's just you don't need to add like other things to it, like the tree, for example. And the bases, you could make that work. I mean, I would still argue that having like showcasing that the rock is being pulled out of the ground, right? Like showing that effect is gonna look better than not having that effect at all. Because now it is just like a floating rock, right? But it doesn't showcase like where it came from. But I mean, that's like relatively easy to just like sculpt in there if you wanted to. So that's not the biggest deal, right? It's more about like I think the biggest thing that you have to keep in mind is how do you, first of all, like what is the end goal here, right? And how do you get to that end goal without overwhelming yourself, right? That's going to be very important. And keeping that in mind and like thinking about that a little bit and simplifying things along the way is going to help a lot, like through the scene. Oh, I mean the idea, not the actual current match. Yeah, I agree. 100%. Awesome. And that was it already. It's quite a chill one today. So I'm not gonna complain about that at all. I am just gonna chill for tonight. So I'm not gonna keep you all here longer than it needs to be. It was awesome to have you all here. Thank you so much for chilling out all. And then yeah, if you want to become a member yourself, get feedback on a weekly basis, and enjoy a bunch more cool stuff, you can become a member by joining in the link down below. Yeah, I hope I'll see you there, and hopefully I'll see you next week as well. With that being said, I wish you all a nice evening. Bye-bye.